Hello you guys and welcome back to my channel. My name is Holly. This is She Reads. Today I am so happy to be telling you that I am bringing you a recent reads video and I am completely out of my reading slump. In fact, I am like on the opposite spectrum of the end of a reading slump. It is crazy. I have been reading nonstop. I've been reading so much. So I'm really excited to show you guys what I've been reading and kind of my thoughts on all of them. And let me know in the comments down below if you've read anything that I've read recently. So we're going to start off this video with Old Souls by Tom Schroeder. If you've watched some of my recent videos, some of my vlogs especially, I have talked about this book. This is a book that Georgia and I were reading for Bestie Book Talks that's going to be coming up. Now, this is about reincarnation, so which is something that I strongly believe in and I'm very interested in. So I was really excited to get this book. Georgia and I, we have had multiple philosophical conversations regarding this topic and, kind of what we believe and what we think happens after you die and all this kind of stuff. And so we figured that it'd be a really cool discussion to have. So when we found a book on this topic, we were both really interested in it. And basically the author, Tom Schroeder, follows a scientist basically on his journeys. This is a true book. So this is a work of nonfiction, and he basically follows him mostly to the Middle East, where there are a lot of cases of people who claim to remember their past lives. So he follows him along and kind of records what's going on in order to try and figure out, is this real or are these people lying? But unfortunately for me, this book really fell short. So once again, while I'm obsessed with the topic, I just think that this book, it just was not executed properly. There was a lot of discussion about where they were. I want to talk about the landscape and, Lebanon after it had been through a war, and just, I don't know. A lot of talk that had nothing to do with the topic of reincarnation, and it bored me, to be honest with you. I found this to be so boring. I think this was part of the reason why I was in my reading slump in the first place, because I was reading this and I knew I had to read it because Georgia had already read it for our Bestie Book Talk, and she told me, she's like, it's fine, you don't have to read it, we can still do our Bestie Book Talk because it's going to be more of just kind of a conversation about our beliefs on this subject. She's like, so you don't really need to read it. But I'm like, you already read it, so I should read it. So I knew that whenever I picked up a book, I'd have to pick up this one, and I was not having it. And so that is why I'm such a huge advocate of DNFing books. Because it can really put you into a slump, because I knew for a couple months, every single time I picked up a book, it was going to have to be this one, because I'm not the type of person that can read two books at the same time, unless one is an audiobook. If one's an audiobook, then I can do that. But so I knew that I had to finish this one before I could start something else, and I just didn't want to. So it left me in a slump for a while. So I'm going to give this a 1 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Ruined by Paula Morris, and this one really helped to get me out of my reading slump. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it a 4 out of 5. And this story follows Rebecca, who is a teenager and who kind of gets shipped off to New Orleans to stay with her aunt. It's like her father's friend. While he's away at work in China. So she goes to live with her aunt, who she hasn't seen in years, and her young daughter, and she starts to uncover some pretty interesting things about New Orleans, where she is, and about the town that she's in. But she has no friends at this new school that she's at. She's kind of labeled as an outcast, and one day she ends up meeting a friend in a cemetery who actually turns out to be a ghost. So that's her only friend. And she kind of finds out what's happened to this ghost, and she starts to unravel a lot of secrets about the town. So it's really interesting. I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 out of 5. Next is This Is Not a Werewolf story by Sandra Evans. And if you watched my reading vlogs from Booktubeathon or from the Reading Rush, then you will already know my thoughts on this book and the next couple of them as well, because I read this during the Reading Rush and I absolutely loved it so much. It gave me kind of Harry Potter vibes, but not in a I'm trying to copy Harry Potter sort of way. I just kind of felt the way that I felt when I read Harry Potter for the first time. You know the way you feel when you read Harry Potter for the first time? this book gave me those sorts of vibes. And I think that there is talks for a second book of this, which I really, really hope, because I really enjoyed this one. So this is about a young boy who ends up at this school. It's like a kind of like a boarding school, I guess you could say, but it's not for rich kids. It's more so for kids that are like maybe in the system, and they get placed into this school where they're away for the week, and then they get to go home with their parents on the weekends. But basically our character turns into a wolf. And there's just magic in these woods around his school, and there's lots of stuff that goes on. I don't want to give too much away because I really highly recommend this one. This one is more of like kind of on the cusp between from middle grade going into young adult, kind of on the cusp. And I definitely gave this one a 5 out of 5. Next for the reading rush, I read a Goosebumps book, and it was Welcome to Camp Nightmare. I mean, I can't really ever say anything bad about Goosebumps just for nostalgic reason alone. And this is about a group of kids who goes to a summer camp, and it turns out to be a nightmare. I gave it a 4 out of 5 just because the ending is a little bit wonky, and I haven't read a Goosebumps book in a while, so I think that most of the endings a lot of times are kind of wonky. But I can't remember for sure because I'm just starting to get into reading them again because I've been collecting all of my childhood favorites, and I'm like, I need to start reading them. So you're going to see these kind of like really young age books kind of sprinkled in my wrap-ups. Next for the reading rush, I finally read To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and I absolutely loved it. Gave it, I would say, a 4.5 out of 5 just because I would have liked to have a happier ending. But also, I mean, I understand that was part of the point of this book, was that these times, like, there wasn't a lot of happy endings in these sorts of situations. So, but it definitely was a really, really amazing read. I can see why it's so popular even to this day. I can see why it's such an amazing classic, and I'm happy that I finally read it. I finally read this. I finally read Mitch Albom's The Next Person You Meet in Heaven. I was putting it off, y'all, like a lot. I pre-ordered this. I got it when it first came out. This is the sequel to my favorite book in the entire world, The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom. And because I love The 5 People You Meet in Heaven so very much, I was a little bit worried to read this, because a lot of times when authors do a sequel to something that's like so classic and so important to you, it can kind of end up taking away. Like for Harper Lee's book, for example, I know a lot of people say that if you read To Go Set a Watchman, it kind of takes away a little bit from To Kill a Mockingbird. And I didn't want this to have that effect on my most favorite book in the entire world. So I was hesitant to read it, but I finally did. I will say I did not love it as much as I love the first one, but I did like it. So I gave it a 4 out of 5. Maybe a 4.5 out of 5. It wasn't quite up there with the original, but it definitely didn't take away from the original either, in my opinion. And in this book, if you've ever read the first one, so I kind of have to talk about both books, I guess. So in the first one, an older gentleman named Eddie dies saving a young girl from a carnival ride, and it goes through the 5 people that he meets once he gets to heaven. In this book, that young girl that Eddie saved ends up growing up, and she dies, and this is the 5 people that she meets in heaven. And of course, Eddie is one of them, and it goes on through there, and yeah, it was really good. Next was a really fun book that I read, which was Everything Everything by Nicola Yoon, and I enjoyed this one. I will say I probably gave it about a 3 out of 5, only because I saw the ending coming really early on in the book. I'm not typically one that can pick up on a lot of plot twists. Like, I look for them a lot, and especially now that I'm more into reading and more, like, since I've started my booktube channel, I definitely do notice it a lot more often than I used to. But I picked up on this plot twist way early on. But this was a really fun book. It was cute. It's about a girl who's allergic to absolutely everything. She just kind of lives in a bubble in her own world, in her own room. And when a very attractive young man moves into the house next door and catches her eye, she basically falls in love with him. And hijinks ensues, we'll just say that. Next is a book called What the Dead Want by Nora Olson. And this one I gave about a 3.5, maybe a 4. Between a 3 and a 4 out of 5 stars. It was really good, but it definitely went a lot different than I expected it was going to go. So basically, Gretchen is a teenage girl. She's, I think, 17 years old. Her mother has gone missing 6 years previous, and she ends up inheriting a mansion from her great aunt, who is still alive, but is fading quickly. So she, hands her over this mansion, and this mansion is undoubtedly haunted, like extremely haunted. And there's a bunch of secrets that she starts to unravel about this house and about the history of the town that this house sits on, that is basically the cause of the haunting. And she finds out some secrets that affect her mother's disappearance, as well as the state of her great aunt. And everything kind of comes together in a way that I did not expect. This book talks a lot about racism and about how Black people were treated back in the day when horrible things were happening, and through the Civil War and all that sort of thing. So, but this was very, very interesting. It was a really good book. It wasn't dry at all. And it definitely, I thought it was going to be more kind of about the haunted house, but it wasn't necessarily ended up being about the haunted house, but more of the history behind why the house was haunted, if that makes sense without giving too much away. Next is a book that I ended up DNFing, and this is Anita Desai's The Artist Disappearance. And this is 3 short novellas, so it's quite a short book. I actually read this one in a try a chapter tag, and I read the first few pages of the first novella, and it kind of hooked me enough to where I decided that I was going to keep this book and read it. But I ended up DNFing it after the first novella. I did not like it at all. I thought it was completely pointless. At the end of the novella, I was like, what was the point of that? I did not like it at all. So give this one a 1 out of 5 stars. I probably can't even read it because I didn't finish it. I just ended up DNFing it. And the last book that we are going to talk about in a physical read form is Give Me the Child by Mel McGrath. And this one was really, really good. This one was a thriller, and it follows she's a psychologist, but she also has had some history of mental illness in her own past. She had severe psychosis that came along with her pregnancy. So because of that, her husband decided that he didn't want any more children because it was just very traumatic. All of her issues she had from her pregnancy. So this goes forward years. Her daughter is, I think, 11 years old, and one night they get a knock on the door that changes their life completely, and a new child ends up coming into their family. There's a huge secret that ends up getting uncovered, but basically, long story short, this mother decides she's taking care of this child, and she realizes there is something wrong with this new little girl. I don't want to give it too much away again, but basically nobody believes her because she's had a history with mental illness in the past. So nobody believes her when she's trying to say basically this girl's evil. There is something wrong with this girl. Nobody's believing her. Everybody thinks she's just going crazy again. And it's her fight to save her other daughter because obviously these 2 girls are living as sisters and spending a lot of time together, and she thinks one of them is evil. So she's trying to save her daughter while nobody else believes her. It's a thriller. It was really, really good. It definitely helped to get me out of my reading slump as well, and I gave it a 4 out of 5. So the last book that we are going to talk about today is actually one that I read on audiobook, and it is One of Us is Lying, and for some reason I cannot remember the author for the life of me, but you'll be seeing it. I'll be putting it up here somewhere, so you'll see who the author is, and I apologize for that. That's really actually pretty rude, but I completely forget. It's escaping me. But I really, 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 really liked this book a lot. I gave it a 5 out of 5. I thought it was awesome. So basically it kind of reminds me of the Breakfast Club style. Basically all these there's 4 different, well, I guess 5 different teenagers that end up in detention one day, and they are all different kids. That kind of is where it reminds me of the Breakfast Club, because there's the pretty girl, the jock, the bad guy, the brain, all that kind of stuff. So they're all in detention, but they all say that they got framed for the reason why they were in detention. They all had cell phones placed into their pocket and go off during class with a teacher that hates cell phones. So he confiscated all their phones and gave them detention, but they're all coming up to him saying this is not my phone. I don't know who this phone belongs to, but I don't know why it was in my backpack, but it's not mine. Of course, the teacher does not believe them, and they all end up getting detention. And during this detention, there's a huge distraction outside, and while they're all looking out the window, they turn around and one of the students is having a severe allergic reaction on the floor and ends up dying. So the police, of course, get involved and they decide that this is actually a homicide, and they start investigating the other 4 teenagers that were in this room because they think that somebody intentionally placed this allergen in the way of this other student in order to kill him. So all these 4 students are getting basically checked into, and there's an investigation going against them, and you're reading the plot from each of the 4 characters. And basically, as the reader, you're getting to know all these characters very intimately because you're reading it from their point of view. They're all, and you're like, you don't think any of them did it. So it's a really, really interesting read because you're like, who the heck could have done this? Because I really don't think any of these people did. So I really enjoyed it. 5 out of 5, highly recommend that one. So you guys, I'm really, really happy to report that that was 11 books that I read in just over a month. I think I started in July, and I think I finished up the last one last week. So in just over a month, that was 11 books. So I'm super, super happy considering where I was a couple months ago, not reading at all for a while. So I'm very, very happy with that progress. And I had a lot of really good 4 and 5-star reads in there. So I'm on a roll. I'm just like ticking along, and I'm really happy to be back into reading. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts on them were. And thank you so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button on your way out, and I will see you in my next video.